casket-bound.
In my interactions with progressives, I often feel like the character in that old Emo Phillips joke. You know, the one where the guy's standing on the bridge ready to jump and another guy comes along and tries to talk him out of it, finds out that they're both religious, both the same subsect, and so on and so on and so on, until they find a tiny point of disagreement, at which point the guy that showed up shoves the other guy off the bridge into the water rather than trying to talk him out of suicide. And it is often like that, trying to talk to these pseudo-left woke scolds. I am an anarchist. Antichrist is up for a discussion and debate, perhaps, but I'm an anarchist. I'm a left anarchist. I'm a pragmatic socialist. That means I want the maximum freedom for the maximum number of people as an anarchist, ideologically, philosophically, whatever you want to call it. And I recognize that socialism, not Marxism, is the best way in which the maximum amount of freedom can be garnered for the maximum number of people. That shouldn't be so much of a problem. And yet it is, somehow. Yeah, it's only when you really drill down to the finer points that we find the disagreement, and it's at that point that I get shoved off the bridge. Like, I care about free speech. The Berkeley radicals used to believe in free speech. The fight for free speech was a defining factor throughout the 19th and 20th century. And yet it seems to have fallen out of fashion in the 21st, which is odd, because we're an ever more interconnected, ever more communicative society. And we live in a time where true absolute censorship is kind of impossible. But inconveniencing large numbers of people and abusing technology to censor ideas is commonplace. And this charge is being led by private companies, often in cahoots with governments, whether it be the German government demanding that Facebook and others crack down on Antisemitism or whatever, which, don't get me wrong, is disgusting. But by putting pressure on the companies, they're censoring by the back door and avoiding their own constitutions and laws that are supposed to protect people's free speech. Nowhere is this perhaps more egregious than in China. There is no meaningful distinction between the government and the companies. Totalitarianism is a hell of a drug. China could perhaps these days be more properly called corporatist than Marxist or Maoist or left-wing at all. It's really just the same corrupt bureaucracy of absolutists that it always has been. And yet, the woke scolds, the pseudo-left, the progressives, whatever you want to call them, want to embrace censorship. But how well has that turned out? Even the arguments to pragmatism don't seem to dent. How did attempting to silence right-wing voices go? How did the riots on campuses whenever a conservative speaker was invited to speak, how did they go? How did they shift popular perception? Did they help or hinder Trump? Did they help or hinder Bannon? Did they help or hinder Brexit? And I feel like I've been beating this drum for longer than I actually have, which is going back to about 2010 or so, when I first became aware of all this nonsense. So I've been trying to get people to see the light for over a decade now. Shit. Yeah, I believe in the power of the welfare state. I believe a rising tide raises all ships. I believe in universal basic income. I think all of this really starts with individual rights. You know, you can have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but without things backing that up, the space and the capacity to be alive, to be healthy, to exercise your freedoms, to pursue your happiness through speech or creativity or work or whatever it is, without the capacity there in the society to allow you to exercise those rights, they become meaningless. Yeah, society's undergoing a big shift, and it could have been so positive, but it's so negative. And I think a huge amount of the blame for that rests at the feet of the current modern woke-skulled left wing. They've lost sight of their roots and what they used to do, which was to try and unite people together, to build bridges across boundaries of race or religion, to show that there was a commonality when it came to class and wealth. That line of argumentation has been abandoned. Identitarians on the right have raised racial consciousness. Identitarians on the left have raised racial identity and consciousness. The same with sexuality, trans issues, whatever else. But these are things that divide. We're no longer fighting for equality for everyone, which is, frankly, a pretty easy sell. But we're fighting for special, particular privileges in the proper sense of the word for people of particular identities. And unfortunately, a lot of people are also arguing that other people must be stripped of their rights, as if that will somehow balance the books, even though no old white men alive today were part of institutionalized slavery or colonialism or anything of the sort, really. Not to say that we've completely banished these evils from the world, but your average Joe Blow isn't responsible for any of these things, and holding him accountable for them, punishing him for the sins of his forefathers, well, it's a very religious idea, and it breeds resentment, which we see played out in the polling booths. I am very, very tired of this, and I am quite a patient, very left-wing person. I try and fail to see the best in what people do, but the sheer amount of personal attacks and impersonal attacks because of what I am, an old white male, I guess, and the things I stand for individually. Yeah, because of these fine gradations of difference, I'm the devil, and pushed into a category with the far right, where I absolutely do not belong. If someone like me is finding issues with what the woke skulls and the prog left, the pseudo left is up to, that should give them pause, not throw me into the same mental holding tank as Turbo Hitler. It makes no sense, and it does upset me. I try to let it go. I'm withdrawing slightly from direct interaction with these people because it's fruitless. But it does hurt, and disengaging entirely isn't really an option, because if I'm not out there, if I'm not doing things, if I'm not making people aware that I am not this gigantic bigot that these people like to claim I am, then they get free rein to spread that rumour. And then people never give me a chance. That's profoundly unfair. It's bigoted. It's prejudiced. But of course they've redefined those terms as well. It is just tiresome, and I know I'm just having a whinge, testing my little podcasting box that I've made, my portable studio. I'm sure I'll have plenty to whinge about tomorrow as well, it being Brexit Day and all. But it's just so fucking tiresome, and they will not leave anything alone. They have no respect for anything, no imagination, no creativity. It's all about subverting and shitting on what has gone before without even really understanding what has gone before. And that's how we end up with so much lackluster pop culture and culture in general. But when people create something genuine, something new, even if it does come from the same obnoxious place, it's better. You know, jacking up old intellectual properties like Star Wars or Doctor Who or She-Ra or whatever else. That's one thing. But then the new stuff that they have created with the same sensibilities can be quite good. Steven Universe is quite good, even if the fan base is more rabid and toxic than any fandom menace could ever hope to be. I'm just so utterly fucking tired of it. There is no attempt to understand from my point of view. There is no attempt whatsoever to be accommodating or generous or to steelman or even to listen. All those things that I extend to other people are not extended to me. And no matter how much good I do, how many good things I do, none of that matters. Just someone's subjective interpretation of my being annoyed at the patronizing, box-ticking efforts of some of this inclusivity bandwagon. And that's speaking as someone who is a member of various minorities, none of your business which, who is resentful when I get tokenized. But all they see is an old, white man, and they don't see that being prejudiced against old, white men is ageism, racism, and sexism. The old one's a new one, though, I suppose. I guess in my mid-40s I have to admit that finally. It's been kind of nice getting the grey in the beard and no longer being carded for beer, or not that I drink beer, but spirits or whatever else. Being finally treated as an adult in most spheres of life, but then suddenly I'm old and nothing I say means anything anymore to certain people. And white? Wow, that means I carry the original sin of my forebears, apparently. Even if my family line never did any of these terrible things, because it was less than the 1% of people that were colonialists, had the power and money and influence to own slaves or anything. The vast majority of us, our ancestry has nothing to do with that. And nobody today did it. And male, oh, that's even worse, isn't it? What happened to the idea of equality? Of treating everyone the same, of giving everyone the same rights, the same opportunities, the same possibilities in life. When did it become about grinding away at some sort of grievance and asking for special treatment, not equal treatment? Unfair treatment as compensation for some slight that your ancestors suffered or may have suffered, or some evil that my ancestors did or may have done, in exchange for special privileged treatment. Because that is what a privilege is. If you have a preferential hiring policy, that's a privilege. Being white isn't. It may have some sort of advantages in some very limited ways, in very specific circumstances, but it's not a privilege. A privilege is a special right extended to a particular group, generally legally. Politicians, for example, have privileges. They're able to make law. If they're diplomats, they may get diplomatic immunity. That's a privilege. The police have special privileges, special rights granted only to police in certain circumstances. But merely being born white or male doesn't make you privileged. And that's, I think, the crux of it all. They seem determined to be ideologically pure rather than to win. And so much of it seems to be about distracting people, pointing them at others so that they don't examine you too closely. You know, young white men racked with guilt unnecessarily over their original sin, trying to deflect it onto others. That guy's bad, not me. I'm good. I'm one of the good ones. Everyone else is bad. Look, I have the decency to be guilty about what I am, my innate, immutable characteristics. Make me a bad and evil person. That's what used to fuel bigotry. I've laboured these points before, but the idea that in order to be bigoted towards someone, you have to view them as inferior is extremely short-sighted. If you look at anti-Semitism, it is often centered around the idea that the Jews are somehow superior, that they're running some kind of conspiracy in the world, that they're deliberately using their money and influence and wiles to undermine and beguile and misdirect the world. That's not arguing that they're inferior, it's arguing that they're superior but malevolent. And this is the same nature of the arguments, such as they are, to argue against men or white people, to suggest that we live in a patriarchy or a white supremacist society. It's absolute bullshit. Sure, there are racists. There are racists of all races towards all other races. At the moment, people of Chinese or just any Oriental descent, because most people can't tell the difference, are suffering the brunt because of the problems with the coronavirus in China. That's people who are afraid and resentful, and that's what turns them against you. I wish, like others, like Pundit, Whinge, I could just celebrate when people are trying to cancel me. I mean, it does generally end up with me getting more followers and nice messages of support and a few extra sales and so on, but for my sins, I am a man of principles, and I want to be understood. And that's why this stuff cuts me to the quick. I would rather be understood than have the extra money or the extra following or whatever else. But it's also because I'm a man of principle I get into trouble, I think. Because I believe prejudice is bad, from anyone to anyone. Race, sex, gender, whatever it might be, it's bad and it's wrong. I don't make excuses for it because someone is not a member of a quote-unquote oppressed minority. They don't get to get away with it. And just because you've cast someone with the same immutable characteristic as me as some kind of oppressor doesn't mean you can't be prejudiced or bigoted towards me. That you can't be racist or sexist or ageist or whatever else. There's consistency there. There's a moral standard that is applied universally when I do it that isn't when other people do. And that's what gets me. The hypocrisy. The sheer, breathtaking hypocrisy and cognitive dissonance of it all. If you're going to lecture me that racism is bad, I agree. But then when I bring you up on your racism towards white people or whatever it might be, Asians are getting a lot of stick even before the virus outbreak due to stereotypes about them as being better somehow. Yeah, if I point that out, that you're being a hypocrite, and you excuse it, that really grips my shit. Anyway, I'm in kind of a melancholic mood. Angry about Brexit, angry about people being shitheads. There's not really a lot that can be done about it, other than vent. So I hope you'll indulge me this once. I keep hoping we've reached the crest of all of this. That is going to start to die away and people are going to start flexing their creative muscles and transgressing again. But social media seems to have prolonged this bout of puritanical behaviour in a way that didn't happen in the 90s. It's gone on about twice as long as it should have done, judging from past experience. But maybe we're going to start getting to a better place where people can transgress, can be consistent, can call people out on their double standards and their hypocrisy without it being such a shit show and without automatically being shoved into a little box marked alt-right. Alt-right, Gamergator, Incel, MRA, and all the rest. You know how it goes. Zang.
Grimm's Tales. Music by Cascade Bound.